For today's card, I'm going to use the Hero Arts Lovebird and Friends stamp and die set. It includes lots of cute critters and sweet sentiments. The die set has dies for both the critters and the sentiments. I'm going to hot foil the background with this Hero Arts foil plate called Twinkling Stars. I'll be using the new watercolor palette that I put together for card making last week. To get started, I'm stamping 2 birds and a twig in Ranger Ink's Archival Coffee. Archival ink is great for watercoloring. But I'm going to need 2 twigs, so I'll stamp everything one more time. I'm using a size 2 brush most of the time. This video is part of a card making YouTube hop that I'm hosting. This month's theme is celebrating friendship. If you're a card maker and want to join, get in touch with me. I have a lab bottle with fresh water in addition to a mug with water. Lovebirds have red heads. At shoulder height, the color changes to green by way of yellow. The tail feathers are blue. For the green feathers, I'm using permanent green. For the red head, I'm using carmine red. And for the yellow transition, I'll be using Indian yellow. For the blue tail feathers, I'll use cinereous blue. Those are the colors I'm mixing to begin with. I'm starting with carmine red on the head of the first bird. I'm adding Indian yellow at the shoulder and sopping up the excess water. Then I'll blend out the color. I repeat the same steps on the other bird. I'm using my fingers to flick some paint off too. While I'm waiting for the birds to dry, I'm turning my attention to the twigs. First, I paint the leaves green, using permanent green again. Using the same color creates a cohesive look. Then I check the temperature of the paper with my fingers. Watercolor is all about managing moisture levels. Moist paper is cooler than dry paper. Moist paper is what creates backflows and blooms. The paper was cool to the touch, so it's too early to paint the green feathers. Instead, I painted the blue tail feathers. They don't touch the red, so there's no risk of getting unwanted blooms. Then I add some shading to the underside of the leaves while I wait for the birds to dry. I check the temperature again, and now it's room temperature, so I'm going in with permanent green on the bird bodies. I'm rinsing out my brush and using clean water to blend the green into the yellow. Then I do the same thing on the other bird. There's a red edge across the face of one of the birds. I'll fix that in the next wash. For the twigs, I'm using raw umber. I'm adding some shading and sepia to them. Then I took a break so everything could dry. After my break, I start by intensifying the blue on the tails. I also added some cinereous blue to the feet. Then I add more green to the bodies. I paint the beaks with red. Then I'm mixing permanent green with some Prussian blue for shading on the leaves. Notice how I'm testing the paint to check the color. That takes a lot of the guesswork out of watercolor painting. After I check the temp on the paper, I'm returning to the birds with some Indian yellow. I'm mixing it out into the green below and red above. Next, I'll intensify the red on the heads with more carmine red. I want the 2 birds to have the same intensity of red on their heads. Now I'm mixing a shadow color out of Prussian blue and sepia. Many watercolorists don't use black or gray. Instead, we mix those colors when we need them. Prussian blue and sepia can create a neutral gray that works for shadows in many situations. I'm adding shadows to the underside of the bird and the bottom of the feathers to create depth. I'm also adding a little yellow to the feather tips to make it look like they point out from the body. Then I die cut the birds and the twigs. I'm also making duplicate die cuts from Accent Opaque for stability. That's particularly important because I'm planning on popping up the birds and the sentiment with foam. Moving on to the background, this is the sample background I created with the Twinkling Stars hot foil plate. I watercolored the background first. Then I used my Pink Fresh solid plate without foil to effectively create my own hot press paper. Then I was able to foil with good results. You can see how little overfoiling I got. I'd like the watercolor to be a little darker and greener than the sample, so that the foil comes across as tone on tone. I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper that's a little bigger than my solid hot foil plate. I'm wetting it with a big brush. It's a number 14 from Escoda. It's important to use a big brush that can hold a lot of water when working on a large surface. While I'm wetting the paper, I realized that I should have taped it down. It buckles a lot. I'm mixing Cineros blue with chrome oxide to create a blue-green color. I put that down all over the paper. Then I add some cerulean blue and more chrome oxide toward the bottom. I'm sopping up the worst water from the sides, and then I'm drying it with my heat gun. I'm comparing the color of the new background with the teal glimmer foil. It's a good start, but I want to intensify the color. I'm adding cerulean blue to some water in a mixing cup. I put that down over the entire surface. Then I add more chrome oxide green to the bottom and cobalt turquoise to the middle. I want the green bottom to hint at a lush green landscape. Then I dry the background with my heat tool again. I'm running the watercolored background through my glimmer machine and die cutting machine with a solid hot foil plate but without foil. This creates a smooth surface. It may still look like there's texture, but that's just the watercolor. Now I'm ready to foil the glittering stars. The holographic teal foil is called moon dust. I'm cutting the foil. Then I place the plate on the glimmer machine. And this is the result. Isn't that pretty? I love the turn-on-turn effect with the hot foil. There's very little overfoiling too. The only thing that's missing now is the sentiment. I know I want to heat emboss it, but I'm not sure if I want it to be green or silver. So I'm going to create both and see which I prefer. I'm stamping the sentiment with Versamark and adding salvaged patina distress embossing glaze. Then I repeat the process with silver embossing powder. I'm cutting out both sentiments using my little white sidekick. Now that I have all the ingredients, I can check my composition and make a decision about the sentiment. I like the salvaged patina. It picks up the blue-green tones from the background and the birds. Silver is not bad, but I prefer the way the green sentiment ties the scene together. I cut down the background to 4 inches by 5¼ inch and line it with Accent Opaque for stability. Here's my card base. I'm going to adhere the background to it with glue. I want the bird on the left to have the tail behind the twig. The bird on the right is sitting sideways with the tail in front of the twig, so I can glue down the right twig. But I think I need to sandwich the left bird between 2 twigs. I'll use a twig I created for my sample card. While that dries, I can put foam squares on the back of the sentiment. I'll use these foam strips from Trinity Stamps behind the right bird. I like when there's a variety of heights on a card. The foam squares behind the sentiment are very tall. These foam strips are a little less tall. Now that I've tested out the composition again, I'm removing the backing paper from the foam squares and adhering the sentiment. Then I do the same with the bird on the right. I'll put thin foam tape behind the bird on the left and adhere it too. That finishes today's card. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find links to everything I used in today's card in the description box below, as well as in my blog post on valley-oak-paper.com. Don't forget to check out the other talented card makers in today's hop. There are links to their videos in the description box below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.